In 2010, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive with 3 decades on Wall Street filed for personal bankruptcy. In that same decade, a woman who spent her working life as an office secretary quietly left a 7-figure fortune to a small college, and almost nobody around her ever knew she had it. Same country. Same general era. Completely opposite financial outcomes. The gap between them was not education. It was not access to information, and it was not raw income. Something else decided which of these two people ended up broke and which one ended up wealthy. Here is the question almost nobody asks about money. If financial success were mostly a matter of intelligence and technical knowledge, why do so many highly trained, highly paid people manage it so badly, while people with no financial training at all sometimes manage it so well? Morgan Housel is a partner at Collaborative Fund, and he spent years trying to answer that question. In 2018, he published a long essay on the Collaborative Fund blog titled The Psychology of Money. 2 years later, in September 2020, the expanded argument became a book by the same name, published by Harriman House as a series of 19 short stories exploring the strange ways people think about money. The book's central claim is stated plainly in that original essay: investing is not the study of finance. It is the study of how people behave with money. That distinction sounds small. It is not. It relocates the entire subject. If financial outcomes were a finance problem, the smartest and best-trained people would consistently win. They do not. Which means the mechanism deciding outcomes is not sitting in a spreadsheet. It is sitting in behavior, and behavior has its own logic, worth examining mechanism by mechanism. This is not a story about willpower or discipline treated as vague virtues. It is 3 specific, checkable mechanisms, each of which explains a piece of the gap between the 2 people this episode opened with, and each of which is worth examining on its own terms before putting them back together. The first mechanism is that wealth is, by definition, invisible. Housel writes it directly: wealth, in fact, is what you don't see. It's the cars not purchased, the diamonds not bought, the renovations postponed, the clothes foregone, and the first-class upgrade declined. It's assets in the bank that haven't yet been converted into the stuff you see. This is a strange thing to sit with, because almost everything in daily life trains you to read visible spending as a signal of financial success. A new car, a large house, a well-cut suit. But the money spent on any of those things is, by the time you see it, no longer available to be saved or invested. What you are looking at is evidence of past spending, not present net worth. The two are frequently confused, and the confusion is not accidental. Visible spending is a social signal, engineered to be seen. Compounding wealth is the opposite. It works precisely because it is not spent, which means it is structurally invisible to everyone except the person holding it. Housel makes this concrete with 2 real people. Grace Groner worked for over 4 decades as a secretary at Abbott Laboratories. In 1935, she bought 3 shares of Abbott stock at $60 each. She reinvested the dividends every time the shares split or paid out, for the rest of her working life, and lived modestly in a small house, buying her clothes secondhand. When she died in January 2010, that original investment had grown to more than $7 million, left to her alma mater, Lake Forest College. Nobody around her had known. Richard Fuscone is the other half of the contrast Housel draws, and his own words tell you exactly why managing money isn't necessarily about what you know, it's how you behave. Fuscone was a genuinely accomplished finance executive, Merrill Lynch's one-time head of Latin America. In the mid-2000s he expanded a Greenwich area mansion to more than 18,000 square feet, with 2 swimming pools, 2 elevators, 6 fireplaces, 11 bathrooms, and a 7-car garage. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, the debt behind that visible wealth became unsustainable. In 2010, the same year Grace Groner's quiet fortune became public knowledge, Fuscone filed for personal bankruptcy. In his own bankruptcy declaration, he stated plainly, "My background is in the financial services industry and I have been personally devastated by the financial." Notice what did not distinguish these 2 people. It was not intelligence. It was not financial literacy in a technical sense. Fuscone had far more of it than Groner ever did. What distinguished them was the relationship between what came in and what got spent, sustained over decades, and whether that gap was allowed to compound in silence or converted immediately into things other people could see. The second mechanism is that compounding is not just powerful. It is radically backloaded, in a way that breaks ordinary intuition. People picture financial growth as roughly linear: put in effort and money steadily, get out a steadily growing result. Compounding does not behave that way. It behaves like almost nothing happens for a long stretch, and then, if the process is not interrupted, the majority of the total result appears very late, seemingly all at once. Warren Buffett is the clearest illustration of this, precisely because his skill as an investor has been visible and remarkable for essentially his entire adult life, and yet the math of his own fortune still surprises people. More than 80th birthday, and more than $81 billion of it arrived after his 65th. Housel's own description of the mechanism is direct: his skill is investing, but his secret is time. Sit with what that means. The overwhelming majority of one of the most closely watched fortunes in modern finance was not built during Buffett's most celebrated early years of stock picking. It was built by the same modest annual return simply being given enough additional decades to keep compounding on top of an already large base. This is precisely why patience does not feel like a skill while you are exercising it. It produces almost nothing to observe for years, which makes it easy to mistake for doing nothing at all, right up until the point where the exponential curve finally turns visibly upward. The mechanism rewards a behavior, sustained attention over time, that looks, moment to moment, exactly like nothing is happening. The third mechanism is that ordinary behavior, repeated without interruption, can outperform extraordinary credentials. Ronald Read spent about 25 years working as a gas station attendant and mechanic, then took a part-time janitor 17 years until 1997. He had no financial training and no inside information. What he had was decades of consistent saving, invested steadily in dividend-paying stocks and left largely alone. When he died in June 2014 at the age of 92, he had quietly amassed a fortune of almost $8 million. He left for $0.8 million to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital and $1.2 million to Brooks Memorial Library, in the same small Vermont town where he had spent his life. His own family was reportedly astonished. Put Ronald Read next to Richard Fuscone, and the contrast becomes almost uncomfortable to look at directly. One man spent decades in an unglamorous, low-visibility job, converting a modest and unremarkable income into a multi-million-dollar portfolio simply by not interrupting the process. The other man spent decades near the top of one of the most sophisticated financial institutions in the world, and still lost the visible wealth he had built when a single severe shock met a structure of debt that required constant income to sustain. Credentials, intelligence, and access to information did not decide who ended up ahead. Consistency and restraint did. None of this is investment advice, and it should not be read as one. Read's 95-stock portfolio and Groner's single reinvested position carried real risk, and both stories are, by their nature, examples that survived. They say nothing about how many similar quiet savers did not get equally fortunate outcomes from the market over the same decades. What the three mechanisms actually explain is not a formula for guaranteed wealth. They explain why smart, capable, well-informed people so often make decisions that a much less credentialed person would not have made, because the decisive variable was never expertise in the first place. Put the three mechanisms together and a single shape emerges. Wealth is invisible by design, which means the version of financial success people can see is usually the least reliable signal available. Compounding is backloaded, which means the behavior that produces the largest results looks, for most of its duration, like it is producing nothing. An ordinary behavior sustained without interruption can outproduce extraordinary credentials, because credentials do not protect against the specific failure mode of needing your visible wealth to survive a sudden shock. Each mechanism reinforces the other two. The invisibility of real wealth is what makes patient compounding possible in the first place, because nobody is pressuring you to convert it into something visible. And the years of apparent nothing that compounding requires are exactly the years an unremarkable, uninterrupted behavior has time to quietly outperform a much more impressive-looking one. Here is what is worth sitting with, and it applies whether your own numbers are large or genuinely small. The financial decisions that determine most outcomes are rarely made in a single dramatic moment. They are made in the accumulation of small, boring, repeated choices about what to buy, what to postpone, and what to leave alone, compounding in a direction nobody else can see until decades later, if ever. The question this leaves you with is not whether you are smart enough to succeed with money. It is whether you can tolerate the specific discomfort of a process that looks like nothing is happening, for exactly as long as it needs to. Here is a real question for the comments: what is one small, unglamorous financial behavior in your own life? It looks like it does. Next time on Marginalia, we look at Rich Dad Poor Dad and the single mental model, the difference between an asset and a liability that splits nearly every financial decision you will ever make.